Hey everybody, this is James Pack here, and thanks for joining us for another episode of The Process. This is episode 3, and we'll be going over how we made this image here, some swamp ruins, using photo bashing and digital painting techniques. So without further ado, let's get into it. But before we do, please like, subscribe, and let me know what you think in the comments. Maybe something that you'd like to see that I can go over. Give me some ideas for the next stuff. Alright, so let's get into it. Okay, now starting off, as always, just a loose directional sketch. I have a canvas open, and for anyone who's wondering, the canvas is about 300 dpi, approximately 3,000 pixels wide. So I start with my horizon line, and just to start to establish some general shapes, some foreground, middle ground, background, maybe some ideas of trees and foliage back there, maybe some clouds. And as you can see, the sketching style that I have is fairly quick, but it's meant to be loose and it's meant to be fairly generalized. Generalizing is good, you know, at least for my workflow, because it gives me a sense of you know, I could still change things along the way. I could still, you know, have room to adjust as the image progresses. So really simply, as a starting point, you know, I gathered a lot of reference. I always start with reference first, and gathering them up, making sure that they're organized, making sure that the references are somewhat pertaining to the materials that you're going to use in the painting. I think it's super important, you know. Artists, we always get into a workflow, like a flow state. Not always, but sometimes we get into a really incredible flow state of creativity, and you know, the juices are flowing out properly, and nothing's more disruptive than having to find new materials, new photos, new references. I mean, obviously there's no way to pre-plan everything, but it's a good practice to attempt to prep, you know, and just see how far we can get. Now, in some of the other tutorials, I always talk about why we start with the sky. If you ever want to check out other ones, please do so. But the sky, you know, as a really simple way to put it, it's a way to determine most of the lighting value and color cues in the environment, all from the sky. So that's why I like to start with it, and I can get somewhat of an immediate read over here. Even just the dark silhouettes backlit against the brighter sky, it's something that just, you know, it kind of looks, it can still read as an environment. We can still perceive what's happening. Now over here you'll see that I'm working on an area that's very important. It's the ground plane. The ground plane here takes up about half of the canvas, as you can see. The other half is about sky, you know, and then we have a few rocks or a few shapes that are scattered around the foreground, middle, and the background. So right now I'm working on the ground, and the whole point right now is to try to create a swampy type of feel, foliage, you know. So just like in my other tutorials, I talk about how I like to wallpaper whatever silhouette or whatever shape I'm working on first, just so that the amount of noise and the amount of, you know, texture is in there for me to start with, and then I can make proper adjustments. So the ground plane here started with a sort of a rocky terrain, and then I put right on top of it some jungle terrain, like mossy ground, and what ends up happening is they mix together, and I love that mixture. I love it when two photos kind of work together, and you are able to now be sort of the conductor of what stays and what has to leave, you know. And it's really fun to do that. So if anytime you guys have a spare moment, try to see what happens when, you know, you import or bash two different types of materials together, and see what kind of complexities and happy accidents you might find. So as working in silhouettes is really important, the water here doing the same thing, trying to carve out, shape out the negative shape, trying to carve out the negative shape of the water. And be mindful that it has to be strong and graphic. Strong and graphic. I also wanted the water to perhaps lead our eye into the composition as well. You know, having some sort of these gestures that guide our eye into the scene. Now initially, in some of my other videos where I experiment with how photos interact with each other, this is a little bit different, where the black silhouettes, those are meant to be ruins. It's a little bit straightforward. On the ground plane, we got to experiment. You know, we were able to actually photo bash different elements together and see how they all kind of work, which is kind of nice. You know, it's really nice to see that. But as we go into a material, or excuse, not a material, but a subject matter that's a little bit more controlled and a little bit more, I guess, needs a little bit more precision, such as like these statues, for example, or the ruins. You know, so initially, I'm going to just start with the most straightforward representation that I'm trying to put out there right now, which is just like statue heads, you know, and other just ruins that are around the kind of composition. So you can see the technique that I like to use, putting on lights and layer, and I can move around the same photo over and over again without it being too obtrusive or changing the value structure too much. It just tends to fill in the darks without affecting the lights. Now at this point, I'm trying to fill everything in. I go over in other videos about why it's important to fill in the silhouette quickly and then adjust the silhouette, the outer shape. And I'm doing that right now. In the foreground, you can see that the photo that went into the silhouette, it informs us of what it looks like on the inside. It informs us about some of the graphic design, the positive negative shapes, the big, medium, small. So I want to go and actually adjust the outer silhouette so that it reinforces what the inside texture is doing. You know, so they work in harmony, right? In real life, our eyes are so sensitive to the silhouette that we can almost tell what something is without even seeing the inside information. We can just tell what it is by looking on the outside, which is, I think, is really amazing. All right, so as I'm working on this over here, I've established the general textures of the three main elements: the foreground, middle ground, background, ruins. Okay. Now, here's an important part. This is a very important step. As we're doing the silhouettes, it was just plopped right on the ground. The part of the ruins that touches the ground plane was just done in a very crude and quick way, right? And so in real life, in anywhere that has this type of aging and history to it, there's going to be a lot of buildup. A lot of this buildup of elements that are right around the transition zone from ground to ruin. You know, there's a tendency for nature to do a lot of small designing, you know, in those areas, right? Such as cracks, moss, foliage and plant buildup, dirt, maybe smaller ruins. So that's the idea here, is to try to get it to feel like it's more bedded into the ground, you know? And so this is a big part about concept design that I feel like we can talk about a lot more, which is, you know, having the artistic abilities to do this, that's one thing. But another thing is so that we are able to pay attention to reality, pay attention to real life, so that we can pick up on these cues, right? These visual cues that we see and we can re-import or reuse into our paintings or into our concepts. And that's what brings the believability. It's always about the subtleties and not always about the real big elements that do that kind of communication, you know? We need all of it to work. We need the big, we need the subtle, we need all of it, you know? And for anyone who's doing world building, or anyone that wants to get into world building, World building is something that contains it all, such as big buildings, big clouds, small plants, little cracks. So everything from big to small is is a good thing to pay attention to. All right, now we're on to trees. Okay, so we've basically established the silhouettes. We established the silhouettes through the sketch, right? The real loose couple-minute sketch. And so once we have the ground plane, we filled in the silhouettes, we filled in all of the necessary shapes. I'm now just going to go in here and set dress this environment so that it feels like a swamp. I actually did some research, and I actually had to type in Google and ask, what are the trees that grow around Southeast Asia the most, or something like that. So I could understand what kind of trees grow in this environment. Because it feels weird if it's like some trees that grow in snow, but they're in this type of environment. It would look kind of odd, and maybe some people would pick it up, maybe some people won't. But I think it's an important thing for our believability when the projects that we work on are asking for that extra sense of believability and realism. All right, so there's a whole lot of photo silhouette grabbing, different techniques here. If that's something that kind of interests you, I can go over that in like a separate video or something. And this is kind of weird here. I gotta express my frustration sometimes because I press a lot of hotkeys, and I work sometimes a little too hastily, like a little too fast. And then I press something and I'm like, what did I press? So that whole part right there was just me trying to undo what I just found. And I have no idea what I was. Alright, so trees. I have a couple of trees, and the thing about trees that's really cool is that in a majority of the time they have a very similar proportion. But it's just a little bit of stretch and a little bit of pull. Maybe some are wider, some are slimmer, taller. That gives us enough variation so that it can look like a forest, right? If it was the exact same tree, like repeated the same way, then it would be too much of a giveaway. But at least 2, 3, 4 trees in combination would be great. Just trying to get some silhouettes, some shapes. Again, for exercises and practice, try to use anything you can. It's really about sometimes learning the technique. But again, when it comes to your professional work or stuff that you're doing for, whatever publication or, putting it out there, maybe start finding your own photos, or taking some of your own so that you can personalize your library. Anyhow, just trying to design some trees that fill in the immediate ground plane space. Get some overlaps, some foreground, middle ground, background separation, One of the best ways to show depth, and I get asked this question a lot, how do you show a lot of depth? Depth, one of the best ways to show depth is overlaps. It's placing something right in front of something else, And obviously we'd have to use the proper techniques of atmospheric perspective and stuff like that to control the space a little bit more believably, but it's one of the most effective ways. So overlaps, big versus small, all those things are great ways to show depth and scale. Also the same shape repeated into the background, like people, for example, great way to show scale. I'm just refining the silhouette. Now right now it's a little bit of a mess because everything's just being composited right now. Things are just getting settled for the application of lighting and color and atmosphere that's about to come in just a little bit. Personally, that's my favorite part. It's when everything it's when the sandwich sort of gets assembled. Everything else is just like an ingredient right now. But I feel like when we apply lighting and atmosphere, that's when the characteristic and the personality of the piece comes forward. And what's interesting is right here at this part, and I'm just kind of going through some of these layers. I'll flatten some of them just to kind of simplify the layer setup. But at this point, this file here, I can create multiple lighting scenarios. And that's something that I'm gonna experiment with some more videos come up. But in production for games and film, it's often practiced that we use the same shot, but just like we just adjust the time of day or the weather or the lighting scenario. It's because in games and film, we often visit the same location or set multiple times, right? So it's great. It's a great way to be an efficient designer while showing all of the variations that are necessary. So right now I'm just creating the most, I guess, straightforward one for me. It's kind of this, just an atmospheric, hazy day. You know, I've done this type of lighting scenario a ton of times. So I kind of understand at least the steps that it takes to probably get through it, you know? And again, the more practice you have, the easier everything gets, right? So, I mean, I've practiced this specific lighting scenario a lot of times. If you go through, I don't know, my Instagram or anything like that, you could see, it's like, yeah, I see a similar lighting scenario. All right, so it's really systematic. I start from the background, and if you notice, I push back the trees, attach the layer into the silhouette to push back the trees with some atmosphere. Then I worked on the statue, right? And then I worked on the ground plane. Okay, so everything's kind of moving forward towards the camera. A little bit of cleanup here and there. And as we're experimenting, I'm going to start pushing some of the color. Now this is something that I tried, and it's good for you to experiment too, but you can get color enhancement in a lot of different ways through, you know, just pushing the saturation, painting color on top via different layer settings and kind of color washing techniques, you know. But there are a lot of ways to get more color, you know. So case in point right here is I can start bringing in this sense of dirt, like this warmer tone of dirt over here, okay, through the photo obviously, but this is something that we want to eventually talk about later, which is color from photos are a great way to get that sensitivity of colors in your piece, you know. But you have to have I think a little bit of a developed eye to control it, you know, because obviously photos can get a little ahead of us, right? I mean, I've had tons of times where photos were it controlled me instead of me trying to control it, right? So maybe you guys understand what I mean, you know. If you do, let me know, because like we all share very similar frustrations as artists, and yeah, you know, I'd love to know if we are going through the same stuff. All right, so just kind of fiddling through the layers over here. Okay, just trying to clean things up, attach. But the main mindset right here is let's just adjust values so that it matches this lighting scenario now. Okay, remember the sky? How it's such a way to dictate all of the lighting scenarios. Well, a little bright spot in the clouds back there. You know, the darker foreground, the atmosphere that's through the ground plane way in the background. These are great ways to try to like control the lighting. Now this scene is a bit more complex than my other tutorials, right? Some of my other tutorials are just one kind of shape in the center. This is more of like a scene. It's more of a complex environment. So this one's going to be a little bit more complex, but it's only more complex because there's more elements. We're kind of doing the same thing, you know? We're doing the same thing. And so that's all I want to be able to do and share with you guys on this, is that it's really important to understand that we shouldn't be changing our workflow based on like a subject matter change or a genre. We shouldn't change our workflow if like the concept we're working on is something easy versus something that you think is very difficult or complex to do, you know? So having a workflow, I think it's pretty important. Photos are pretty great, you know, and I just want to tell you, Sometimes photos can be used very, very directly, like the sky and the tree silhouettes, right? Or the texture of the face, the stone face, the statue face. But also photos can be a great way to just fill in noise, you know? There's a lot of visual noise everywhere. Next time you're driving somewhere or walking by, you know, like a park or an area with a lot of bushes and trees, just look in there and see how much noise there is. You know, it's just visual complexity, kind of like confetti. But every once in a while, there's a simple shape, like you see some tree bark, or you see patches of leaves that create a nice and strong graphic shape. So we need that every once in a while, you know? Oh, maybe I'm being a little too, like, kind of analytical, but I look around our everyday world and I try to observe, you know? And the more we observe, the more we're able to hopefully bring that realism into our concept art or into our illustration work. All right. Dark and light. Light and dark. Those are the two main, I guess, tools that we can use right here. So how can we utilize light versus dark, overlaps, soft edges, hard edges? How can we utilize all of those elements here to create a scene that's not only compelling, not only believable, but it's something that you're able to sort of dictate, like you know where the focal points are, you know where the person is or the viewer is trying to look. And so that's where I'm experimenting with sort of the you know, adding in more details in certain places with some of the photos, with some of the noise of the photos. I also add in, you know, a little bit more fog or atmosphere layers, sometimes to just pop an edge forward, you know, so that it's more visible, you know. So everything is being controlled right now just by values, not really a lot by color. It's not really a piece that has a lot of color in it yet, but it's really about just seeing dark over light. Believe it or not, this is mostly all environments. All environments we have to deal with space and distance, you know, conveying realistic, not just lighting, but like the time of the day, you know, the weather, the details, and on top of that you have to design like a narrative or a gameplay. So I would say it's pretty complex, right? So that's why, at least for myself, with the years of experience that I have, it's only taught me one thing: work step by step, one element at a time, and don't try to balance, you know, 8 things at one time. You know, for me that was like a magic trick, if we can balance 8 things, and it felt great if we could do it, but it was hard to do it all the time. It was hard to actually repeat it and have consistency with delivering artwork like that to a client. You know, it's great for personal art. It's really great. Sometimes the difference between personal art and what we do for production and what we do for the client. All right, so here's another thing. I'm trying to get some more color in here. Just saturating. So what I did was I copied a layer on top of itself, and I'm just gonna saturate it the heck up with a certain color, you know, and I'll just mask it out and maybe paint some of it back in manually, you know. So I'm just experimenting. These are just different ways to show or impart color. You know, so one way was, you know, we can wash, we can just saturate something up. Over here we can hue shift and then manually paint parts of it back in. You know, if we just wanted to get stone, like I don't know what you call it, like just some of the calcium or whatever on the stone is just like a little bit different or something. I have a question for anyone watching. Where do you look for your references? I mean, obviously, outside of like the main Google and stuff, but how do you guys find, you know, or source or like get your stuff of inspiration, you know. I'll tell you, I love watching this one show called Earth Moods. I believe it's on like a streaming platform. I think it's Disney. I'm not sure, but Earth Moods, man, that thing's awesome. And I've been also watching a lot of Ancient Aliens. You know, just things that like really drive a lot of imagination, but it's like kind of rooted in some realism and history. You know, it's pretty fun. Traveling, love to travel and see different things. And so at this point, I'm just trying to see, there's an idea brewing in my head. I was like, what if there's like some trees growing on top of the statue, like growing out of the statue, you know, or around the statue. I was squinting my eye down now. I'm like, oh man, it hides the shape now. It's hiding it, you know. So remember, guys, sometimes we're gonna have steps that progress the piece forward. Sometimes we're gonna have parts that digress the piece, like a digress that goes backwards, you know. But whatever it is, try it out. You know, there's no harm in trying. And in fact, if you learn how to experiment quickly without a lot of you know, time input, and you just experiment, and if experiment's working, then you just kind of keep going. But if it doesn't, then you know, it's only a little experiment, and it's totally worth going down that rabbit hole a little bit to see what happens. So here's a fun fact. Whenever you see me noodling like this, that means I'm kind of stuck. That means I'm starting to render, you know. And so I'm doing things in the foreground just to tighten it up, because I know eventually I'm gonna have to tighten it up. I know that. So instead of developing, you know what I was saying, the tree growing out of the head, I'm just gonna do something that progresses it forward, but I don't have to think about design right now. You know, I'm just thinking about continuing the rhythms of water, you know, stuff that's already established. I don't have to think as much. But as I'm doing this, I'm giving myself valuable time, valuable thinking time to what do I do with that statue head in the background, right? Like, I just need to figure that out. And sometimes we just need time. It needs to marinate a little bit sometimes, you know? So back and forth, I'm trying to go to developing the image, right? And finishing the image. So developing the image would be, oh, how do I experiment with growing the tree out of the head? And finishing the image is, okay, let me tighten up the foreground, let me get some of the, you know, details and rough edges to be tighter, so on and so forth. So whenever I'm stuck, I'll go to the other side, and if I feel good about where it is then, I'll jump over to the other side again and try to develop the piece further, back and forth, back and forth. Yeah, the atmospheric perspective, perhaps. That tree right there just feels a little like doesn't feel composited properly. So again, just trying to do it until it looks right. You know, one thing that I want to also add is when I was man, I used to have some really bad habits, and one of the bad habits were that I would, let's say I was you know, working on the tree in the foreground, for example. If the tree, I wasn't satisfied with it, I would just move to another part of the painting and just kind of develop that. And if I wasn't happy with that part, I'd just keep moving. And what ended up happening was I felt that I never was able to solve any part of the painting. It was just like everything was just like this unsolved little touched parts, you know, and I didn't like that, right? And so I guess I don't know how I adapted a little bit more of trying to finish, but maybe it was through talking with friends and, you know, learning from other instructors and so on and so forth. But eventually came to a point where I'm like, yeah, I gotta like commit and like kind of finish these things as I move forward. It's kind of like building furniture or building a Legos. You don't just like half tighten the screw and then tighten another half screw, you know, you gotta tighten it all the way, and it builds from that. Everything's built on top, you know, it's an assembly. Hope that makes sense, guys. So, anyhow, I did a curves pass. That curves pass allowed me to get some lighting on the ground, maybe a little lighting on some of the foreground and the midground and on the statue, a little dappled lighting on some of the shadow areas and such. And so you can see here, it's step by step. Silhouette, fill it in with photos, start adjusting the atmospheric perspective and values, then we can go into lighting, right? And lighting for me is not showing light through the air. That's actually atmosphere, but it's light and shadow. It's seeing surfaces being hit by the light, right? So imagine like there's all this like God rays coming through the air, but there's no light on the ground. That makes no sense. And in fact, if we saw light on the ground but no God rays, it would make more sense. Like people can still believe that, you know? So light hitting the object, seeing the cast shadows, right? See that tree in the water, the cast shadow? That's probably one of the only real cast shadows that you see, other than one in the foreground as well. But again, those are the cues, right? Playing around with some color, just building things up. Now, naturally, myself as an artist, my natural ability for color is not that good. You know, I've always struggled with color, but through, I guess, through the years and stuff, and through just like practicing, we can all learn how to create steps to crutch our weaknesses. And I think that's important for all artists to understand, is we're going to have weaknesses, but we're also going to have tremendous strengths. And you know, we just need to fill in where it's a little bit weaker, and we can reinforce more where you are strong, you know. So hopefully that's some if that resonates with anybody, but I definitely know for me it was great to hear that from an art director saying, yeah, you don't have to be good at everything, you know, like we hire you for your strengths, you know. I was thinking about like a tower in the back, maybe another shape. And I was like, forget it. Let's take that out. Okay, so I think at a point here, we're getting to see some pretty good development. Okay, now I'm going in here and just adjusting silhouettes. I need to adjust the silhouette. It's pretty important that, I mean, for like, I'm such a silhouette guru, you know, or like nut. I love silhouettes, and shape is such a, I don't know, something that I kind of react towards. So that's what I like to do, you know. And if this is something that reacts towards you, then give it a try. If it's not, then, you know, maybe explore techniques and see like what does really kind of resonate with you, you know? Anyway, moving forward, just a little bit of rendering here. It's getting kind of slowed down. And again, I'm telling you, whenever I'm doing that, that means I'm a little stuck, right? I'm a little stuck. I don't know where and how to push the piece forward. So again, I'm just rendering, giving my brain a little bit of rest time to think about what's next. Now I'm just moving around some tree shapes and collapsing some layers. And here's where I think the idea of, okay, let's place the tree on the head of this. I think I'm starting to grow a little bit more courage to do that. So let's just see how this comes out. You know, set in the silhouette, and I'm just trying to push the shape into the atmosphere. Make it feel like it's transitioned on that surface. It makes it feel like it's actually on there. Painting in some roots, you know, making a little bit of focal point interest. And so, you know, all the layering that you see over here, it's pretty important that I attach things into the silhouette, just so that we never lose the true shapes. And so that's something that I like. It's very crucial that I pay attention to that. And anyone that's probably working in this type of way, yeah, silhouette clipping in, you know, the clip mask. Clipping them in is going to be such a way to preserve your designs. It's going to be so awesome. So here I'm just adding more, a little bit more smaller shapes. I was just thinking, what if there's a couple more trees stuff back there? But I don't know. We'll see how that goes. Alright, let's start pumping in some color. So I'm going to go into a new layer, soft light, and get some warm tones over here. Just warm tones. You see how saturated that orange is. And now I have a new layer on top. Going to go to color dodge with black. I'm just going to paint in a little bit more saturation, especially towards the ground plane. And probably a little bit more from the upper right. Yes, a little bit more warmth, a little bit more contrast. It sort of harmonizes the colors together on the palette. Thinking about some tertiary details back there. Let's see how that works out. It's like, let's just keep it in. Sometimes there's a preference to hand paint things. Sometimes there's a preference to use some photos. It's very you know, it's not always too scientific, but just know that you have a lot of options when it comes down to it. You know, you have a lot of options to rely on. You know, you use photo, hand-painted things, you can just grab silhouette, just fill them in, or anything that you want, you know? So, don't be discouraged, but know what kind of visual goal you're trying to go for. Okay, I think I found a layer back there that was just kind of in a weird, doing something weird. So I had to find it, delete it, turn everything back on. You know, it's about organization, right? Just organizing. Good old birds. Quick trick, just turning photo black and white, but let me grab a better one. Photo into black and white, really push that contrast, and then just sample tone and grab the silhouettes. Let's put it back at the top, stays up there. Let's darken it all down so we can see what's going on. Now just erase the elements that are not working. Again, this is just concept art, it's not a finished illustration. It's meant to convey an idea and assemble, you know, what a vision of the finished product would look like, what the last keyframe would be of a film, or what a screenshot of the game would look like. And so having a way to quickly bring in the suggestion of that information becomes a really effective way to work, you know. And so some people like to use 3D, some people like to hand paint them in. I particularly just like to work with silhouette like this and fill it in with the tone and textures and stuff like that, and it's just a process that works, you know. So give it a shot, you know. Let me know what you guys think. This image is pretty much close to getting wrapped up, but I do want to show you guys there's this other part of, remember I was saying making variations, you know. Making variations are real crucial, and so I want to show you guys a quick rundown of some of the variations that were created for this after this one. It's almost like when you look at it, it's almost like we have two variations already. We have like a desaturated gray-green, and then we have a more saturated sunset version of it. So it's like we're creating variations as we're going along anyway. Yeah, it's doing file cleanup. More floating files or silhouettes that are just like being intrusive to the piece. Alright, so there we go. Alright, so here are a few variations from different climate and color palettes, different times of day, as well as using these assets to create different compositions. Now each composition I wanted to make sure that we play around with a slightly different viewpoint, a slightly different type of communication and storytelling, but more so getting an idea of what this world really feels like, you know. And in concept design, that's what we really do a lot, is we don't just design one shot, but we design an environment, a world. So being able to see these different glimpses, these different viewpoints of an area that feel very similar, that's what it's all about for creating a world. That's what world building is. And so these videos that I wanted to share with you are really about creating that first image, but there's a quick way, an effective way to create these other supplemental concepts, all made from the same pieces, and it becomes a really effective workflow that I'll be sharing coming up soon. But just want to show you guys these images, had a lot of fun with these. Thanks for joining me on this video. Please let me know, like and share, but we'll see you guys on the next one. This is James Pack again. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you guys later. Thanks for joining the process.